Should I go to that side?
Yeah. It's, oh. It's muted. Yeah. Nope. And to build a business and earn money through that business. So with further ado, let's talk about a bit of how you can make money. But first off, what is Rapid? Some of you might have heard, might not have heard about Rapid, but we started in 2016 as a company not really specifically focused on payments. It was more accepting cash in the UK, so from an ATM, so you could top up a wallet on your phone with cash and then go to the ATM machine in the UK and take cash out of there from that wallet. And in essence, is reducing the FX fees that you typically have as a tourist going to the UK and changing euros to GBPs or USD to GBP. So that's how we actually started, but we kind of shifted the business into payments because we found out, okay, if we started in the UK, which was very difficult to get a license, and we have to do that in every single country out there in the world, it's going to take too much time. So that's why we started creating a platform. So it's where we work with local partners all around the world to accept payments, but also disperse payments. So we have offices, as I mentioned, around the world. Here in Amsterdam for the European region, but we also have in the UK, we have in Iceland, US, and also in Asia and Singapore. And we have 880 employees worldwide. So what is it that we do? So this is a snapshot, but afterwards I give you a good snapshot of our presentation of all the product lines that we have. But in essence, we can collect payments in over 100 countries. We can disperse funds to pay out to a bank transfer to over 190 countries. We can hold funds. So that's one of the cool things that we can do. And that's where the FinTech as a service actually arises, is that we can hold funds on behalf of other businesses. So it doesn't have to be yours, but you can help a company and hold their funds using our licenses and then manage those funds. And what we can accept is card payments, bank transfers, e-wallets. In Asia, e-wallets is predominant, but also cash. So with us, and you get more choices as a business. You probably all know a lot is API driven. It's the same in the payments industry. A lot of things are API driven. We do also have, for the businesses that are not tech savvy, also out-of-the-box solutions. You just pop up a payments checkout page and show that to your consumers. Postal solutions, payment plugins, and also point-of-sale terminals. So you might, if you go to Iceland, you have a holiday there one day, and you go to the store, you'll probably see a Rapid point-of-sale. So we're very predominant there in Iceland. The cool thing about Rapid is that you have a single platform. So it's just one integration in essence, which gives you all these capabilities that you can use yourself as a company, as a customer of Rapid, but also as a developer or a platform yourselves to offer it to your customers. So that's the beauty and that's the idea of this conversation today is, hey, you can use us in order to offer your customers not just the design or the development of an application or of a website, but also additional services of actually earning money yourselves. And it's think of, okay, it's not the billable hours or a project I'm selling. I'm also earning a commission on the transactions that take place on that platform. And that's where you could use a company like ourselves to make that, to enable that. So that's kind of a nutshell what I said. Payments in the past was a cost. A lot of companies just said, oh, well, they're Stripe, just go and talk to them and they'll offer you payments and let me alone. I'll just do the development of the website of the application. And the idea that what we have is to say, hey guys, don't do that and do that yourself. Just create another revenue stream. So that's where we're trying to make some changes in also the mindset of different companies. Just to think about, okay, that part of earning money in a different way. So this is, the old model is, for some companies actually that we see is advertising. Some they would say, okay, we have a lot of views. That's how we earn money through ads. But yeah, and the payments is an expense part. We outsource that. And the new model is what I just mentioned several times now. And you'll hear it in the presentation as well. Is offering that payments. It gives you an idea. If you earn 2% on a transaction and you have an application or website where a lot of transactions take place, if you earn a commission of 2% on each transaction, that's a good recurring business that's happening on a daily or per minute basis, right? So you can go to sleep and still earn money. So this is the part of the product offering that we have. So as a business, and you'll see with the use case, there's a fantastic use case that they're using actually all our whole platform, all product offerings that we have. So on the collect part, you have to think of it as, okay, incoming money. So I'm accepting money from my users. They pay by card or bank transfer or cash or an e-wallet in Asia. But sometimes you also have to pay people. No? So you have maybe freelancers that you have to pay across the world. So you can say, okay, I'll start dispersing funds to their bank account. So for the salary payments or for affiliate marketing, so you have to pay fees, or even for Google or Facebook for the ads that you get. So the disbursements, the wallets is where you think about then the funds that we can hold on behalf. So the wallet infrastructure. So you can, what we can do is KYB businesses, and you can say my customers are businesses. We use our licensing, we just verify them to see, okay, are they a legitimate business and not a fraudulent business that we can hold the funds off. And then with using the other products, you can collect, put money into that wallet or disperse money from that wallet. And the fourth and last very interesting product is issuing. So there's a card issuing. So you can say, hey, I got freelancers, I want them to use my card to make payments, for example. So that's the whole ecosystem of payments is within the platform. We do more things than, of course, collecting payments and just holding them. You have the FX services, you have the reconciliation, so that you can say, okay, I got these payments come in, these payments come out. So from a financial perspective, there's also an additional value to it. So yeah, you might have heard all about fintech. What is fintech? Fintech is actually very broad. So these are some ideas that you can think of when we talk about fintech. And also product ideas or projects. Some of you might be entrepreneurial and think, okay, I want to start our own business. How can I integrate payments into that business? So what we see also is a lot of customers come to us in the lending and financing part. So think of buy now, pay later for consumers, but also for businesses is a hot topic lately. You have insurance tech, so when you see insurances, you don't have to go to a website and then fill in information, but you can do all through an application and offer payments within the application. Market and exchanges, think about crypto and trading platforms like Robinhood in the US. Then you have financial management, think about expense management, invoicing, and the likes. Payments and transfers is the remittance world. You have to send money to one side of the world, but also collect those funds. And then retail banking, so like neobanks also benefit of using a platform like ours, but others like in the market can offer then a wide range. And don't go home and think, okay, Rapid is the only one that can offer this. There's many more, and you can integrate with all those services and create a total product offering. So how does payments drive revenue? So this is the case study that I want to present, which is cool. So I'll play a video of the operations officer to tell what she thinks about Rapid, if there is. Oh,
they muted the sound on the TV.
Oh. Oh, no more feedback. Okay. So, and I can't get, okay. So I can't get the sound out of this one. No, but then I get, yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm trying, but I'm not tech savvy. Okay, so no.
So you sound from here?
Yeah, yes. Yes. Oh. Okay. Yep. So that's Catmos. So that's the customer that I onboarded onto Rapid. So I'm super happy myself. So I've been told today not to wear a Catmos shirt because I always kind of wear Catmos swag. But yeah, so Catmos is an example, great example of a company that did not exist prior to them having Rapid in essence. So the whole business is in essence set up on or built on top of Rapid. And yeah, the complexities in that world, you have to think it's like an ancient world. So only a lot of paperwork, a lot of faxes still going on there. Like you can't really understand that, but and also cash heavy. So you might have heard of all the pirates in Somalia. The reason why they're attacking the boats because they know there's a lot of cash on those boats. Because of the salaries of people, there are 3 to 9 months on sea, and they have to get paid their salaries. Half of their salaries are paid through a bank transfer, and the other half was on cash on boats. Because then they go to a port and have to buy buy toiletries or whatever. So yeah, they're revolutionizing in essence the seafarer world or the shipping industry. So paying these individuals, these seafarers, in the local currency using the local rails or local bank accounts. So yeah, that's ideas that you think of. Here is like the recent industry in the news. You see a lot of reduction in earning money through the advertisements. That's one area. Of course, there's many other areas. It's not losing money, but there's a less revenue stream there. So that's why we also see that, okay, this is the moment where we should introduce the fintech also to the developer community and expand it. And hopefully that helps us as a business. So yeah, this is the companies I also refer to. So we're not the only ones in this industry that you should look at. There's others as well. But yeah, how did it grow? How did fintech come alive? Of course, you have the internet, the cloud, software as a service, the mobile. Everyone is using it, so it's like mobile heavy. As you can see with Catmos, all the seafarers have a mobile. That's the easiest way to communicate with them. It's on the application there. And then if we can add fintech to it, payments, receiving money, but also paying out, that would be, and that's fantastic. And also with the card issuing, if we can do then put on your phone, so you don't have to have a physical card. You can just have your phone and you're pretty much done. So yeah, so how do you monetize fintech? So there's the 2 ways. On the example of Catmos, you do it all yourself. Or as a company, you can say, okay, I'll help my customers, make them earn money as well. And then you also earn a part of commission. So there's the solutions, partnerships, that you create a platform, use the whole ecosystem of Rapid and use it themselves. And the referral partnerships that you can say, okay, I refer a customer to use Rapid, and then there's like a referral commission, or you earn money also on those transactions. Yeah, these are some tips that you could personally do as well if you're very interested in implementing fintech in any application or business that you think of. Find a service that provides something that on high frequency, acquire the users as a typical application does to get consumers to come and to use the application or website. Once you have all that data, you can say, okay, I'll add the financial product to it. So collecting funds, holding money for them. Think about maybe a Viber or a TangoMe, where you have a lot of individuals looking at mobile applications, and all this content creators also have to be paid. Some people paying to see the content, and the content creators receiving money. And engage users with the repetitive models on cross-sell, upsell. Card issuing is, for example, creating a loyalty within your user base so that they start using your cards. There's also branding. They show the brand cards to other people. So yeah, that's the idea. So yeah, the cool thing about Rapid is that you can start using it directly. So you can open an account with us and start playing on the sandbox environment. And if you have an application, you can directly test it out as well. So they start building it. And I remember the QR code that's actually on the first page.
There is another one.
There's another one, okay. So most of you have seen probably that nice box over there. So we have a QR code that comes afterwards. Please scan it. And we have a survey so that we understand of whether you like the presentation and if there's something that we can improve on. And for a lucky winner, we have then the R2D2. So you might be lucky tonight. So that's my presentation. I'm handing it over to Tiki. That will give the real deal, the presentation or the demo on Rapid.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Tiki. I've been a backend developer at Rapid Backend. I know it's supposed to be front-end people here. I'm a little bit of an imposter, but I have worked with front-end, so I was allowed to come. I've been at Rapid for 2 years, a bit over 2 years. I recently became a team lead there, but still a developer at heart. And I'm here to show you guys how easy it is to integrate with Rapid. Before I get started, I wanted to give just a general overview of Rapid Stack. Obviously, this does not include everything, and it's a big generalization. But we use AWS for cloud services. Our main databases are MySQL and MongoDB. Most of our front end is React, and most of our back end is Node.js. Again, there are outliers, but that's just a general overview before we get started in the actual demo. And how it's done is building integrated fintech in minutes. And I love this slide. And the reason I love this slide is because it sounds like a lie. It's like integration is never a few minutes. It's never a few hours. It's usually a few days or weeks if you're integrating with a third-party API. I'm assuming in front end that happens as well. I'm not going to make any assumptions. But integration takes a long time, whether it's just to sign up to the third party or to get credentials or to like create the authentication headers in order to make your first request. It just takes a long time. And I know that with Rapid, it takes a few minutes, which is incredible. And I'm also it helps that I'm a backend developer because I'm going to show you guys front-end things that I haven't worked with. So these are not products that I've been working on. It's our front-end teams that have been doing this, and I'm just doing a demo for you guys. So I'm coming also like you guys new to this whole idea. And so this is the plan for the demo. It's no-code, low-code solution for a hosted checkout page. We'll get to what everything is. When I say no-code, low-code, obviously I don't mean no code. There is some code. Rapid needs you to make a request in order to help you. It's like a help you, help me situation. But it is very low code for someone who is a front-end developer in order to integrate into their own, let's say, their website, which we'll get to what that means. And I'll just give you guys, I guess, the scenario that we're going to go through. Imagine that we have a business, that they have a website, they have everything. They have a beautiful UI that you guys built. There's a back end, there's a front end. It's all really working well. They have their items up, their pricing. The one thing that doesn't exist is the checkout page. And you guys as front-end developers, you're like, okay, fine, I'll make the UI, like no problem. And then the business says like, okay, so go, like make the front end and do the checkout and just make it like the ability that I can get money for all the things that I want to sell on my website. So you go and you look it up, and then you see that it's going to take you decades to get legally processed and to go through the whole legal process of being able to accept payments just in Amsterdam, let's say. And then you want to move to like another city. So forget about international people buying things from your website. It's not going to work. So you go back to the business and you're like, I can make you a really pretty UI, but we can't accept payments. It's not going to work. So he sends you back to Google and he says, okay, find me a way to somehow integrate something that will allow me to accept payments in every country internationally. So you go and you look it up and you find Rapid. And you find something that Rapid offers, which is called a hosted checkout page. A hosted checkout page is what it sounds like. It's a page that's hosted by a third party that you can do checkout on. And somehow you as the business will get the money at the end of the day. So that's sort of what we're going to go through now. So we'll start with number one, which is Rapid's client portal. So you're going to go and you're going to sign up to Rapid, obviously. So here I've opened up the client portal just so we can have it. Sign up is super easy. They don't really need too many details. You need a name, which like I hope all of you have, an email, a phone number, country, and that's it. That's all you need to sign up. You click sign up, and then you get to this page. You toggle the sandbox toggle up on top to make sure that you don't make any real payments with real credit cards. And that's it. Like you're sort of like ready to start. So we'll go back to our plan. Number two is we're going to create our little local server so that we can sort of show how we're going to integrate. So I'm going to go here. I opened up this folder. It's empty except for one thing, which is my cheat sheet. But other than that, it's empty. I called it Amsterdam, and I thought that was super clever. And I'm very proud of that name. So if anything, I'm happy. So in my cheat sheet, the only thing I have two things. I'll explain what the second thing is, but just how to install the server. Again, I'm a backend developer. I'm not going to remember this by heart, so I'm just going to let that go. Yes. Okay, installed everything. Amazing. NPMI. We're ready. So I'm just going to run this for a second just so that we can see that it's all working. Go to localhost. And here, the automatic routes are users, and we're supposed to see respond with a resource if everything is working well. Yay! So we see respond with a resource. So we have the local server up and running, and now we're going to go to the next stage, which is test like the simplest API we can, just to make sure that the integration is working. So Rapid has one of like a really simple API. It's called Get Countries. It just returns a list of countries that Rapid supports payments in. So we're going to go to the documentation, which this is Rapid's main website. We're going to go to the API reference. Now, again, as I mentioned, one of the main like sort of hassles when integrating with a third party is trying to generate the authentication headers, or even just like format the body correctly, like all these weird things that just never work. So what Rapid has, which is amazing and it solves everybody's problems, is sample code. We're going to take here from the Node.js and just copy it, and I'll put it here as maybe utilities or request utility. Copy that here. I'm not making any changes, okay? So the sample code does work. The base URL is already there. It's the sandbox API at Rapid. The only thing that we're going to need is the secret key and access key from our client portal to start making requests. So we're going to go back, where is it? Here, to our client portal. Here in this developer section, we have the access key and secret key. Weirdly enough, the biggest complaint we have from developers is that here it's access key and secret key, and here it's secret key and access key. So one day we're gonna fix that, I promise. There just seems to be bigger issues all the time, but I mean, not bad issues, just issues that we need to deal with. So we're gonna copy that and don't get confused. The secret key is the longer one. We're gonna save that. And now we're gonna use this, we'll rename it so we don't get confused. We'll rename it countries. And here also, countries, we'll leave the user's router. We'll allow it. And we're going to do /countries instead. And here in our countries, we're going to, instead of doing res send respond with a resource, we're going to actually make a request using the sample make request function. So let's do countries. Remember that we're just doing the simplest one to see if it's working. So this make request is from our request utility. So that's what we put in. And the method is get. And I'm going to go now back to the here and search up this API that I keep telling you guys that's really simple. Countries, we're going to find, here we go. So here, this is the route. We already have the base URL in the sample code, and it's a get, so that makes it super easy. And we're going to return countries and hope for the best. We're still sort of with backend, so as I got this. Okay. No. Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, we added in a wait, which wasn't there before, so we just need an async there. Okay, let's go here, and instead of to /users, we're going to go to /countries. Ta-da! Okay, we managed to connect to Rapid. We got a list of countries. Now that was just checking the authentication headers, making sure that we are able to make a request to Rapid. And now we're going to move on to our actual, like, what we really want to do, which is create a hosted checkout page. So as we mentioned, why do we want this hosted checkout page? We want a way to accept payments without doing the UI and also without having to deal with all the horrible things that are involved with making payments internationally. So we're going to go back to the documentation. We're going to search up checkout. So there. Do the same thing that we did with countries just now with the checkout. We're going to go to create checkout. Now we're getting a little more complicated because it's a post, but we'll manage. We're going to copy this route, paste it here. It's going to be a post. Before I forget, I'm going to go back here and do /checkout. I'm not going to change the name. Bear with me. Okay. Here. So now instead of countries, this is going to be our checkout page. So this is sort of what's happening in the back end of the front end, okay? This is what they're going to be requesting in order to display it or to redirect. We're going to see two different examples. We're going to do a checkout page and also a toolkit, using a toolkit to embed the checkout page. So we'll look at both of them, but for now we're looking at the redirect. Okay, now the body for this, there's only 3 required parameters. We have an amount, which basically as a merchant, you would have on your UI, obviously the whole card, and you would sum up the amount, the currency that they're paying in, and the country that they're paying in. So let's create the body. And we'll do amount. I need like a really special amount so that we recognize the payment. Any amount. 420. Wow. Okay, lucky we're in Sandbox. What's 420? The date. Oh, wow. Okay. Now it makes total sense. Okay. Okay, so we created the body with the 3 parameters that we need. We sent it to the make request, and we're going to restart our server and hope to get a response. Okay, now remember we changed it to /checkout. Okay, so we got the response. Most of this is irrelevant to the front-end user other than this guy, the redirect URL. As we said, this is a hosted checkout page. So it is hosted at sandboxcheckout.rapid.net. And as you guys can see, half of this URL also has a checkout token, which will be relevant later when we're using the toolkit. But what you guys would be doing as front-end developers, you would be getting this redirect URL and redirecting the customer that wants to pay to this page. So let's pretend like we're redirecting. And we should see Rapid's checkout page. Here's our 420 euros. We see, oh, it's a lot of money. The customer can put in their bank details, they can put in their card details, they can pay with Google Pay. If we open this in Safari, if we just took the redirector out and opened in Safari, we would see Apple Pay as well. So we'll try and make a payment. Luckily, a fake one. Okay. Fake credit card, a valid, okay. A name, I'm gonna go with 2 names that I learned here, combine them. And we'll do place order. So here we're still on the hosted checkout page. And once we click this finish button, the customer will be redirected to wherever the merchant defined they should be redirected to based on the request to the checkout page. We send in Rapid's homepage, so when we do finish, we should be redirected to rapid.net. Now, after that happens, let's go back to the portal, go to collect, which is payments, and payments, and we should see our very big payment of 420 euros. And here's all the details. The only detail that I would want to, mention now is the e-wallet section of this. A lot of people ask us, okay, that's great, the payment's going somewhere. I never defined where it should go, and I don't really understand how I'm going to get it at the end of the day. So when a merchant signs up, not just using the sandbox, obviously using production environment, they connect their bank account to digital wallets. That's defined here in the client portal. And what they're able to do based on currency and bank account, let's say here we have euros, 420 euros when they're added to the balance of this e-wallet defined here. Obviously here there's a section of wallets. You could go there and you see the balance of each currency that you have. And then per merchant, they have their own configuration, which is called the settlement configuration, if you guys have heard of it. And it means just how often Rapid should take real money and turn this virtual money into real money and take the money and put it into their bank account, into the merchant's bank account. It could happen weekly, it could happen monthly. I'm not really sure all the options, but that's when the actual money goes into the bank account. Before that, it's all virtual. It's in their e-wallet here, and they can sort of track how much money they have. So that's the checkout page. The next thing, where did I put it? Here. That was step number 4. Now we're going to go to step number 5, which is use Rapid Toolkit to embed a checkout page. It's very similar, just in this case, instead of the whole UI being redirected to another domain, I guess, we're just embedding a little toolkit that they can do the checkout. So all the backend is still happening by Rapid, like all the code is we're making the payments, but so they can keep their pretty UI, but just have an embedded checkout. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go back to the documentation and look up this time toolkit. And also here they have a really good sample HTML, so we're going to take it. Going to copy it. There's like an extra HTML up there, which always screws people up, so that also has to be removed, but all in good time. Okay, toolkit. So imagine this is like the merchant's UI. This is what they're trying to sort of embed with Rapid's toolkit. So this is using that. Oh, okay, wait, another thing that's really confusing, and I also suggested that they change, is that if you're using Sandbox, you have to copy this and change the sample script. Okay, so like if we're here, this is going to be our like merchant's website. So we're going to be like, buy Amsterdam swag. And then that's going to appear, and then inside is going to be the toolkit. One thing to notice is that here the toolkit needs the ID, and that's what we spoke about in when we did request checkout. We'll go back there. Here, there's an ID. That's the checkout token. So technically what you could do is request from the server first to checkout, copy the ID, and then put it there. But obviously that's not going to happen because we need this to be automated. So that's another thing I have in my cheat sheet, is just an automated request to our backend server. And we put it in here. So we're going exactly the same request we did from the browser. We're getting back that checkout page, and we're just taking the ID like we did there. Here, like also in the toolkit, you can like customize. You see like here I just did color and text, but like you could do tons of other things as well. There's a lot of options. And that's it. So let's try and rerun the backend server, and we're going to go to this HTML page. Now, I'm pretty sure what happened last time was that I had a CORS issue. I still have a CORS issue. Okay, so I'm going to go to my server. Still there. Oh, no. No matter how many times someone from the front end explains to me what CORS is, I'm...
Don't worry, we don't still know.
Oh, you guys still don't know? Lovely. Excellent, okay. But I did learn how to use it at least, and then I need to also install it. Okay. Complaints, is that? Okay, let's try again. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is our merchant's UI, and then they just sort of implemented this whole checkout page. We can make another payment just to make sure that it does work the same way. Oh, too many. Putting in the same name. Also here, obviously it's 420 because our backend server has like it hard-coded when they're creating the checkout page, but obviously in a real website, it would not be hard-coded. And we'll make another payment of 420 euros. And here, so in this HTML sample, it sort of just disappears. I don't know why, but apparently that's fine. So like they're supposed to redirect or do something with that area, but I'm not going to ask any questions. And we're just going to refresh here and make sure that the payment actually went through, because there it's not so clear, and it did. We have 2 payments of 420 and 20 euros. And that's it, as simple as that. And you guys saw how fast it was to indicate already start doing the hosted checkout page. Obviously, Rapid also has direct integration where you're not using the checkout page, you're just using all the other features at Rapid. We chose this to show this, first of all, because the assumption was most of you are front-end developers. And also it's just really easy to show how fast it was to like get that checkout page. So that's it. I'm here for questions afterwards if anyone has any. That's it. That's it.
Thanks, Tiki. No, we'll be doing this in a second. All right, thank you. That was truly inspiring from both of you. At least now we know how to make ourselves rich. But I think we would be taking questions from you guys now. Maybe you might have a couple of questions for our presenters. No questions at all? Well,
does Rapid act as a merchant of service? So does it like issue invoices in each country? Because if you sell in different countries, then you have to like issue a local invoice in each country, right? No,
It's a business question.
I do have a question actually for you guys, because it's true that it does seem to be integrating these financial services into your software seems to be somewhat more straightforward with your platform, but you must still have a couple of challenges from new clients. So typically, what are the biggest challenges that developers or clients of yours might run into when integrating your platform?
I think the most challenging part is the thing is that we offer so much.
Yeah.
So then they think, oh, well, we can do this, then
Yeah.
that, and then the roadmap gets longer. And then you think about the time frame was actually a few weeks. And
Yeah.
then they say, oh, we want to do this, this, and this as well. So they start adding stuff.
Yeah.
So it takes a bit longer project. So on the same with the Cosmos example, they thought they could go live within a few months.
Mhm.
But then they start, okay, we're going to start issuing cards as well. We can disperse
Okay.
those countries and those countries as well.
Yeah.
And they start adding more and more capabilities to it. And the thing is of adding more capabilities to it starts getting a bit more complex. So you
Mhm.
need to really think, okay, what I'm doing now, how can I simplify it?
Yeah.
Because it's just getting too much. Because you have to think about dispersing funds is not just to a bank account. You
Yeah.
can disperse funds like in the Philippines, an e-wallet, or you can disperse funds to a cash point.
Mm.
And those
Yeah.
points are additional things that you have to think also on the front end or on the application. You have to
Yes.
add that as well.
Indeed.
So that's typically where we see a lot of things getting simple.
And you have actually real people dedicated to supporting your clients, or it's mostly just documentation?
No, definitely. So we have 880 people.
Yeah.
And all of them are supporting customer facing. But we definitely have, we have engineers like Tiki yourself, but we also have the sales engineers who are customer facing as well. So we've seen so many examples like Catmos, it's like a complex one in itself.
Yeah.
So all that experience we can share that with customers.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Does anybody else have any additional questions?
Yeah, so thanks for the demo as well.
Yeah.
Are there any SDKs available right away? Maybe also that provide TypeScript support?
I think we used to have an SDK, and then we stopped support. Is that?
Nobody ended up using it.
Yeah.
When we first came out, we came with a very nice SDK, but at the end of the day, everybody used it.
Sounds familiar.
Now we're building some SDKs to solve costs, which is the UK now. So we will have SDKs for solve costs.
All right. Thank you for that. No more questions? Well, if there aren't any more questions at this stage, I think we will take a 5-minute break for all those who need to go to the bathroom and maybe grab another drink, or if there's any pizza left, then you can happily serve yourself. And we'll see you back here in 5. Thank you.
Are you next? Are you next?
papers and everything. Just you can scan the QR code and answer a short survey. This will help us to really understand if this was beneficial to you, if the content was interesting, and it's really 5 questions. And once everyone is done, we will pick the winner. People are still answering, so I'll wait another minute.
Gonna be fine.
All are done? Anyone is, no, not yet? Not yet? Okay. 3 more seconds.
We're gonna win. It's fucking like
One more?
Yeah, Italian with slow.
Sorry.
It's gone.
Slow and everything.
Take it, come, you have to pick one.
Oh, I have to pick?
Yeah, of course. Just with blind, blindfold.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But
Yes.
I gotta wait.
Oh, man,
Yeah.
you do.
You're done? Done? Italian's done?
Yeah, yeah. It's easy.
Wait a second, I refreshed. Okay, take it. Just. Okay, lucky one is Yalda. Yalda? Oh! Yalda, what you doing in the afternoon?
Wow. Good meetup.
I was like, this is it.
Stop.
And unfortunately, that was not stolen. All right, thanks, Rapid, for that great talk and that awesome prize, even though it didn't go out to me, but I won't hold it against you. Well, next up, we have Gerrit Lingerveld from the Storybook.
Storyblock works too. I get that all the
Even
time.
better.
You're not the first.
No shots fired, no shots fired. But, well, please take it
Yeah,
away.
we have a very friendly relationship with the folks at Storyblock. So no, we tend to we have some conferences like booths right next to each other, and it's fun. Yeah. So yeah, the whole story about Rapid's platform, it reminded me of a. Let me mute this because. All right. So that reminded me of like one of the clients I used to work for. Like I came in, it was an e-commerce, and you know those payment platforms, right? You have this finish payment at the end, right? You had one too, right? You have this final finish payment button. So they had this whole payment thing set up, but folks just didn't click the finish payment thing. So they paid, they didn't click that button. They just closed the tab. And none of those orders ever came through. They got paid, the company got paid, but those orders never actually made it into the system. So that was actually one of the first things I fixed for them. So I have my experience with payment platforms as well. Anyways, onto the subject of Storybook. So today I'm going to talk to you about Storybook and its past, present, and future. So a little bit about me. I'm Gerrit Lingerveld. I'm a software engineer based right here in the Netherlands, and I'm a staff software engineer at Chromatic. So Chromatic is actually an American company. It's a Silicon Valley startup. We don't have any offices there. We just like everyone's remote. So I work on both Storybook and Chromatic. I work actually mostly on Chromatic, but I'll explain the relationship a bit later. I have been involved with Storybook over the years, like for the past 4 years at least, and like I work closely with the Storybook team. So for anyone who doesn't know what Storybook is, like any raise hands? Like, okay, so who doesn't use Storybook? A little bit more. All right, cool. All right. So I'll give a bit of an explainer about what Storybook is. This talk is not about what Storybook is and how you can use it. It's not going to be a technical talk. So this is actually my only slide about what Storybook is. Now, Storybook is it's a tool for front-end developers, primarily to build user interface components. So what you do is you write your code in your Visual Studio Code or whatever, right? Like you have here on the right-hand side, and Storybook gives you like a visual interface where that component gets rendered, like it gets displayed. And that allows you to just focus on the one component that you're building right now. That might be a button, might be a complete form, might be an entire page, or a more complex thing. But it allows you to build those components in isolation without having to spin up like an entire application on your local machine or like with a backend, a database and such, right? You just have your UI. It allows you to catalog all the variations of components that you have, and that there can be a lot, right? So a button has variations like in colors and sizes and such, but that gets way more complex when you build like an entire page. You have all the variations like error states and edge cases that you got to deal with. It allows you to document the component library that you're building so that others in your company or around the world can like understand what components do and how they are supposed to be used. So it auto-generates documentation pages for your components. And then it allows you to test your complex UIs and interactions. We have some tooling for that as well. To make that really easy. So you're probably familiar with Jest, for example, to write unit tests. So basically what Storybook does is it gives you a visual user interface, graphical user interface on top of Jest and testing library to make that way more convenient to debug. And finally, you can share your Storybook with stakeholders like your designer, manager, whomever needs to take a look at the user interface and the state of it. And so Chromatic, so to clarify, Storybook is an open source project. It's completely open source, it's on GitHub, it's free for everyone to use, and it's owned by the community. Whereas Chromatic is a company, the company that I work for, and Chromatic has built a tool on top of Storybook. And that's why we care so much about Storybook and the success of Storybook, because we're building something on top of it. So Chromatic provides automated workflows for Storybook users to basically allow a whole team to collaborate on those Storybooks and be like confident about the code and the user interfaces that they've built, that they're like correct and continue to be correct over time as you change code. So it allows you to publish your storybooks to the world or within like your organization and approve any changes that we automatically detect over time. So what you see here on the right-hand side is a visual diff, a visual comparison between two screenshots. So what Chromatic does, it takes screenshots of your components, and then it compares them over time. If you push new code to GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab, then we'll take new screenshots and compare them to the previous version, what we call the baseline. And that's what you see here on the right-hand side. The green section is what's changed in these two variations. And what's really neat about this is that the thing what you do with UI components is that you reuse them all over the place. So say you have a button component, but it's like used in 50 other places. But what happens if you change that button component, like it has a bit of extra padding, it becomes a little bigger, and it might trigger a reflow of text like to the next line. That might be fine in some situations, but it might break a user interface in other places. And if you've got 50 places where that button is used, it's really hard to keep track of, like to manually verify each of those 50 places that it still works like properly. And that what Chromatic does is automatically see all those 50 places and tell you, hey, you got to visually like check all these 50 instances. Do they still look good? And you're like, approve, approve, approve. Oh, this one's not right. I got to go back to my code and fix it. We do the same for pull requests. So if you open a pull request, we basically give you a visual comparison of your target branch or your feature branch side by side. So, and you can assign your manager or designer or whomever to review those changes. So it's like code review, but visually, like on the screenshots of your user interface. And finally, gather like feedback from a stakeholder. Like you can comment on those screenshots and everything. And we synchronize then the status of the acceptance and such to GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab, so that you get like a nice check mark on your pull request, or like a cross if it's like still broken, and that like can block your pull request from getting merged. So it's very much like testing but visually for your code. So enough about Chromatic. This is not a sales pitch about Chromatic. This has been all about Chromatic, well, for the most part. What I actually came here to talk about is the history and future of Storybook as a project, as an open source project. So here's a timeline, and it starts in 2016 this is the graph of commits on GitHub, on the next branch in this case. And I've plotted the major events of what happened on the Storybook project along those lines. So Arunoda is a developer from Sri Lanka, and he actually originally developed a Storybook while he was working at a company called Kadira, and they it started kind of like late 2015 as a project, and it grew, and they released a thing called React Storybook because it was specific to React. They released React Storybook 1.0 in like April 2016. So all was good. It gained some traction, and there was some ongoing maintenance from the team at Kadira, and they released React Storybook 2.0 after a while, which came, and the project was going in the right direction, and actually started to gain some traction, some adoption, among others, some folks like here in the Netherlands. I was working at a consultancy firm called Xibia at the time, and I too used Storybook actually at that customer, that e-commerce that I mentioned earlier. So I was also a Storybook user, so I was already kind of using the thing. I wasn't really involved with the ongoing development of Storybook itself, but I was a user. But at some point, you see this trend going down and down and down, and basically what happened is that Kadira, that company, they shut down. So the company just shut down completely, and none of those folks were working on Storybook anymore. And at some point, there was actually a ticket on GitHub that said, "Is this project dead? What's going on?" Right? So it's almost like it just ceased to exist. But luckily, there were a bunch of folks who cared enough to take up the ongoing maintenance of the thing. So Norbert, who was actually a colleague of mine at Xibia at the time, the guy here on the left of the three, he was like, "Oh, yeah, sure, I'll take up maintenance for this project for like, well, I'll do it for like 6 months, maybe a year, because I care enough about Storybook. I want to keep it alive, right?" And so were some others. Michael and Tom were also on that same thread, right? And they decided, okay, let's do a Slack channel, and we'll see if we can make the move into a community project. And it actually worked. So Arunoda gave all the folks like admin access on GitHub for the repository, and allowed them to like publish a thing to NPM, and yeah, it just became a community project all of a sudden. And it worked out really well. Well, actually, Dan Abramov, you might know from like React and such, and Redux, actually also like kind of tweeted about it. So like, yeah, it's so great to see that it actually worked out for the project, right? This was already like, he noticed like, oh, hey, nice, this is going somewhere, right? And in May 2017, Storybook 3.0 was the first actual like open source community release of Storybook, and it was also no longer called React Storybook, because like the community had already set their sights on making this a framework for not just React, but Vue and Angular and others, right? That was already like in the top of mind for those folks. And by this time, like there was like contributors from all over the world working on Storybook. Like it really gained a lot of traction because like it was a lot of people like were building React apps at the time, and they were like, oh, this is really convenient to use a tool like this. So it gained a lot of traction. And so in July, they released Storybook for Vue. I believe it was for like version 3.2 or something. And later also Storybook for Angular. So really this polyglot kind of a framework or like tool for multiple rendering engines, so to say, Vue libraries, really started out. So Vue, Angular, and React. And at some point, Michael and Norbert both decided to join Chroma. The company is actually called Chroma, not Chromatic, which was quite a big milestone. But of course, like, maybe a bit questionable. There's like folks like, yeah, should this open source project be owned by a company? Well, to be honest, let's be real. That's the reality of having a really big and project, open source project. It's hard to maintain something like that in your spare time, right? So Norbert was doing it in his spare time while working as a consultant. And others were doing that too, but that's not really sustainable if you've got like big goals and you want to support Angular and Vue and all the other stuff like Babel and Webpack and all this, everything that's like also moving around. So it wasn't really realistic, but luckily, so Chroma came along and they said like, okay, sure, we're building a tool on top of Storybook, so we care that this is properly maintained. So you know what, you guys can come work for us and work on Storybook full time, and getting paid for it. So yeah, I mean, obviously they jumped on that occasion, and so photos like this emerged. So they had a meeting in San Francisco, and like this is the three founders of Chroma, Chromatic, along with Norbert and Michael. So this is for the middle picture, Zoltan, Norbert, Tom, Michael, and Dominic. And yeah, they are still with the company till this day. So Storybook. Storybook 4 was released in October 2018, and it looked like this. I didn't find a light mode. I could only find like a dark mode version of it. But yeah, it was early days. It didn't really look the part, and like there's not even a Storybook logo in the UI. But I mean, it worked, so it did what it had to do. And in March 2019, there was a bit of rebranding. So the Storybook logo was modernized, and Storybook 5 was released with a like fresh new UI. So Storybook 5 was when like there was like Dominic is the design, one of the designers at Chromatic, and took like it upon him to like redesign the UI for Storybook to be like way cleaner and like basically what you all know today. Of course, it's like evolved over time since then, but it kind of started out in March 2019 with the new design. I joined somewhere mid-2019, and shortly after, Component Story Format was released. Component Story Format is kind of a technical thing. It's like a language in which stories are written, and stories are basically the thing that in which you describe the variation of the component that you have. So a story is like, oh, I have this button component, but it also needs these parameters or props to render, and that's what you define using component story format. Doesn't really matter, but it was a major milestone in the whole roadmap. Also, MDX Storybook originally was mainly a platform for building like design system component libraries and documenting those. There were several competing tools in the space right back then, like DocZ and StyleGuidist, and also Storybook. And MDX was, well, all the rage to like write documentation pages with embedded components in them. That's what MDX allows you to do. And so Storybook started to support MDX as well. later, Storybook Docs was extended to support Vue and Angular and other rendering engines. Storybook Docs is it's basically what it does. It looks at your component code. For React, it's like it looks at like prop types, but it can also look at TypeScript type definitions, for example, to figure out, okay, what is the kind of schematic or schema for this component? Like what properties does it accept, and what kind of values should that have? Should it be a number, a string, or something else, right? And then using that information, like it infers that information from your JS doc blocks, for example, or other things, and then renders that in a nice table on a documentation page. So that's what Storybook Docs does, and it was extended to support Vue and Angular in 2020. And then later, 2020, Storybook 6 was released, another major milestone for the project. And well, the biggest change with Storybook 6 was that we introduced args, which is also kind of known as props, but args and controls, the controls add-on. There was an add-on called knobs back in the day, but knobs had like a lot to be left desired, mostly because it relied on everything runtime, like calculation and such, whereas one of the, well, let's say goals for Storybook on a technical level is to be like statically analyzable, so that you can like just you don't have to spin up a browser to know what the component or what the thing is doing. You can just use Node.js and just look at the code itself to figure out what's relevant here. And that's, I believe, one of the reasons for like switching from knobs and things to args and on top of args controls. So moving on, 2021. So Storybook as a project isn't just about like the tool itself, like the thing that you spin up on your local machine. It's not just that. It's also like if you run like a successful project, you need to have good documentation, and you need to have other things in place so that developers like yourself are like happy to use the tool. And one of the things that we invested in was the add-on ecosystem. So Storybook from the early days already had like an add-on system where you could like tack on, install additional like those panels that you see that you saw, like the tabs, add some additional interfaces so you can customize Storybook in a way. But with the add-on ecosystem 2.0, we released like a whole page on the website where add-ons would be published, right? You can actually open up just a GitHub repository, push your add-on there, and if I believe your package JSON file in there has some specific properties, then we automatically crawl GitHub and NPM to figure out, hey, this looks like a Storybook add-on. We're gonna list it on the Storybook website. That happens automatically. You just need to have like a special tag, I believe, like the Storybook tag on NPM, and then it just works. So that's how we kind of scrape the internet for add-ons that are out there, and we list them on the website. And of course, there's some additional metadata to have like a nice thumbnail and such. But that's what the add-on ecosystem was all about. So that we like, encourage that, and there was like a lot of documentation to how to write add-on, and there's an add-on toolkit. So if you want to write your own add-on, you can just like clone this template repository and just tweak some things, and you get an add-on, right? It's all there. March 2021, Vue 3, Svelte, and Webpack 5 support. All major milestones again, like if you went from 2 to 3, well, obviously we need to go along with what the entire, where the ecosystem is moving, right? So if there's a new version of Vue, Storybook has to support that. If there's a new version of Webpack, moving from Webpack 4 to Webpack 5 in this case, we've got to go along with that. And Svelte was like up and coming and the new hotness, and folks were like happy to support that as well. A big topic that's like people have been like complaining about is performance. So Storybook has historically been kind of slow to boot up and to recompile your code when, or like update when you change some code, or but the biggest grudge is like it basically took 10 to 15 seconds for the initial startup. One of those things, or sometimes even longer. But that was like in part due to Webpack. Webpack is just a hugely complicated beast, and we've worked with Matthias Kappers, who is like one of the authors of Webpack, to actually optimize Webpack in Storybook to make it faster and faster, and actually it's actually pretty good these days. But people were yelling, we want Vite, especially the Vue community, of course, right? They were like, why are you still using Webpack these days? Come on, it's 2021, we want Vite. Well, obviously, again, we had to go along with that. And I mean, of course, we care about performance also. So Storybook for Vite is like officially supported since June 2021. CSF 3.0 came along. So CSF, component story format, started out like early days, but it too has evolved. And the idea with CSF is that it's like a standard that is just based on ESM, so ECMAScript modules, and is not so much like proprietary to Storybook, but like a generic language in which you can define these sorts of things, so that other tools can also adopt it. I don't know off the top of my head, but there is a bunch of other tools out there that use CSF as well. I think like 10 of them or something. So it's not just Storybook. Jan is actually also based here in Amsterdam, joined in 2021. You see, there was quite a long time since I joined before like Jan joined. So we had a fairly slow ramp up time, but it's getting there. In November, Interactive Stories was introduced. Interactive Stories is actually something that I worked on over the summer, like 2021. And the idea is that there are some, like, Storybook essentially works in like you pass some props or args to your component to say, oh, hey, this is the data you're getting, do your rendering, render in the way that you want. Unfortunately, there are situations, states of user interface where you can't get to using props alone. You need to say there's a modal that only opens when you hover over it or you click a button, for example. Right? So that's what where interactive stories comes in. We introduced a concept called a play function that allows you to say, okay, let's run this little piece of script. As soon as the story is done with rendering in Storybook, we actually trigger a hover state, or like we trigger a click, or we type some text into an input box. And that's what interactive stories is all about. And then on top of that, we introduced interaction testing, which allows you to also make assertions on the changes that you've made. So you can say, look, I type some text into this input box, click the submit button, and then I expect some function to have been called. So it's kind of like where it's kind of touching this unit test, jest tests kind of thing, but visually. So that this is not how it actually looks, but it's like a marketing image for it. But essentially what you get is a step-through debugger. It looks fairly close to this, by the way, in the real thing. So you get a step-through debugger for each step of the flow that you have, like type some text into the box, click this button, and then confirm that the graph renders properly, right? And what's nice about it, this runs all in your browser, right? Your regular development browser. So you can open your DevTools and inspect an element midway throughout running those interactions, right? So because you can pause in halfway and then inspect element and see why is the next step in this, like why can't it click the submit button, for example? You can figure that out. You don't have to look at like a stack trace in your terminal or like a HTML dump in your terminal. You can just inspect element in your browser. So that was a pretty big thing. In the same vein of the add-on ecosystem, we introduced Component Encyclopedia. So what Component Encyclopedia is about, it's basically the showcase section on the Storybook website. And what we've done is we are crawling the web for public storybooks and we are showcasing those on the showcase on the website. So you can actually see, oh, hey, this company, Stripe, for example, maybe Rapid, has a button in their design system. You can actually search for button and see all the buttons in design systems from companies all around the world. Or you can click through to like the Microsoft design system and see all the components that they have in their design system. So that's what the component encyclopedia is all about. So we had Jeppe and Casper join. There's a colleague of Casper here, a former colleague of Casper here too. And we released the test runner. And the test runner is an interesting thing. So maybe you've noticed there's a bit of a theme here for testing in Storybook. Historically, Storybook was more about documentation, but in recent years, it's been more and more about testing with interactive stories and interaction testing, and now the test runner. So essentially what the test runner does is it allows you to run those interaction tests in CI or in your terminal, besides running them in your browser. But what's fancy about it is that you don't just get like a stack trace in your terminal, your CI system. You can actually click that link and just jump straight into the Storybook and see the error right there, and then do your debugging, right? So that's what the test runner enables you to do. So it's like a much better workflow for like, doing user interface testing, basically. Valentin joined us from Germany. And these are, by the way, these are not like the employees, all the employees of Chromatic. These are just the people on the Storybook team, because we're like 50 people now. I didn't list them all. The Framework API. The Framework API is interesting because it is like a generic API or like a frame for adding new frameworks, say view layers or things like Next.js, Nuxt, SvelteKit, all of those things, using a nice generic API. Because like in the past, adding like React support, well, React was already there, but say you want to introduce, I don't know, well, Svelte support, for example, then you had to go into like some pretty low-level APIs within Storybook to make that all work. And so they really took the plunge and kind of came up with a framework API that's like properly documented. How do you add new framework? How do you add support for additional view layers, but not just view layers, but like entire frameworks, meta frameworks are they called. So Next.js and Nuxt.js are like meta frameworks. They're built on React and Vue, right? But they offer much more, and that's where the framework API comes in, because we've recognized it's not like there's combination. Sometimes you are using a React app with create React app, or you have a React app which is based on Nuxt, or it might actually be a remix app, right? And those are like, they have various kind of compilation ways and such, and Storybook needs to integrate with those things specifically. So it's no longer enough for Storybook to say, oh, we provide React support in Storybook. No, we need to provide Next.js support and remix support and such support, right? Nuxt and all those things. SvelteKit. So that's why the Framework API comes in, and it unlocks going forward to continue to integrate with all those things. Ecosystem. So ecosystem is troublesome. As you can imagine, like Storybook needs to integrate. It integrates with all of these various things, not just React and Vue and Nuxt and Remix and all those things, but also Webpack, Vite, and other builders, and there's like Babel, and there's TypeScript, and there's all those things that they all come together in your software. But the problem is that those projects also are like evolving all the time, and it wouldn't be the first time that like the React team decides to ship a new version of React and all of Storybook is broken. So in order to know about that before our Storybook users are affected, we actually have something like a status page. And you can go to that page on the Storybook website. This is just React, but there's like for Vue, they are there for Vue and for Webpack. All the things that we integrate with, we actually have nightly jobs the check, like, does the current version of this library still work with the current version of Storybook? Like, does it pass? Sometimes you see it's gray because it failed to run or something, but it wasn't run. But most of the time they're like green, and that's good. But it's also happened already on multiple occasions where like we were aware of a library author having messed something up before they realized it themselves. So sometimes the Storybook team is like contributing back to another entirely package to fix their thing. And the nice thing about this is, by the way, that other like a few, I believe, and other things are also starting to adopt this these days. So we're not the only ones doing ecosystem CI kind of things, but we might be one of the first at least. Vanessa joined company, and Vanessa is not a developer. Vanessa is a manager. So Storybook has its own project manager now. So she's like full-time dedicated to, well, making sure that everyone is happy and stuff is progressing properly, and there's like process in place. And you might think of it as overhead, but it's really necessary for such a complicated project. I mean, a tough job. And we actually had our very first user conference, Storybook Day, in March 14. It was a remote conference, online only, but it really was a blast. And we had like talks from some of the Storybook team, but also like some customers and other users in the community. Some folks from Vercel, for example, right? I believe, and then later on we shipped Storybook 7. And that's where we kind of are right now. Storybook 7 was, well, officially released like last week or 2 weeks ago or something. But it's been a blast. Like they've done so much work, and you can see this graph in the background going like, ooh, there's so much stuff happening. And actually it's kind of fallen down because like after such a release, they need a vacation, right? But that too is gonna happen. They'll have a retreat soon. And this is kind of what Storybook looks like right now. It's not so much different, like there's little tweaks, but what you might notice here is that we no longer have at the top of the page like two tabs, like a canvas and a docs tab. It used to be there. That actually moved to the sidebar. So there's like an overview page here, which is like the docs page of that thing. So we actually moved that into the sidebar to free up the thing in the top. And well, let's talk a little bit about the future. Maybes. These are maybes. Like I cannot give any guarantees as to whether these things are going to happen. The ones at the top are more likely, though. But performance ×2. That's the goal, right? It has to be just twice as fast. And there are like ways to get there. Right, there's like optimizations happening, moving away from Babel in favor of ESBuild and SWC and other tools that are like kind of, there's faster tools for certain jobs these days, so we're starting to adopt those, which should improve performance by a lot. And also we've already been like pre-bundling a bunch of code so that you don't have to compile it on your local machine. We'll continue to do more of that in the future. So performance is set to improve. RSPack and TurboPack are two like alternatives, like Webpack alternatives, both written in Rust. And RSPack support for Storybook is actually already out there, built by the community. It's super beta right now, though, but it's really nice to see that the community is like using the framework API to add support for RSPack to Storybook. And we are in talks with Vercel, who are the maintainers of TurboPack, to introduce TurboPack support as well for, of course, like the Next.js users. We are going to be doing a lot more chromatic integration, not like forcing that on anyone, but there's like really nice workflows that can be unlocked when you basically take the chromatic workflow but bring it into Storybook, giving you like a way faster feedback loop on testing. and even better testing. This is what, for example, that might look like. It's like what you see here in the panel on the bottom is like the history of your components. So that you can like scroll back, like what did this component used to look like in the past, right? By the way, these images are all the same. This is a mock-up, but like, and then see them side by side. Like, what's the difference between these two? Like the one I'm currently like changing code for, and the one that I have like on main right now, for example, right? Or actually do like visual testing on that. Like, let's see a visual diff between those two components, and also like, can I like maybe like accept it straight from within Storybook, or like see how it was rendered and such and such. Right? These are ideas right now, so no guarantees that this is going to be one-on-one, but some things like that are coming. Story tags has been a feature that's like requested a lot. So basically people have been asking for like, is there a way to filter the sidebar of stories to just see like the things that I care about right now, things that are like specific to testing or maybe not specific to testing. So story tags is what's likely gonna be the way to make that happen. So you can like tag stories with a tag, and then only show stories matching a tag, or not show them, or whatever. Command palette is like everyone's using a command palette these days, and I really want to get the command palette in there, but maybe someday when I find the time to do that. But I mean, that's kind of my passion, my own passion, to have a like nice command palette. But the designs are there, so we just need to build it. And comments. Would be pretty cool if, like, right within Storybook, you can actually have a conversation with your colleagues about about the implementation of the UI that you have right now. So let's have a conversation, or like, and then like improve things over time. So that's it for today. Thank you. I just wanted to say, like, Storybook still is, even though like Chromatic supports it, like backs Storybook a lot, it's still like maintained by 1,600 plus developers all around the world, and you can be one of them, right? We really appreciate like any and all contributions. Actually, a big part of the work that the Storybook team at Chromatic is doing is actually enabling others to contribute back to Storybook, to also like open an issue, open a pull request, and then help them get it across the finish line. Because really, we want to merge those things from anyone, right? It's not like just us doing the work. So, but thank you.
Actually, thanks for answering my question.
Oh, that was your question already. Well,
yeah.
There you go.
Anybody can contribute with the pull request.
Of course.
Great.
I mean, it's open source, right? So,
wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got some stickers right here and pins. If you're interested, come grab them. But yeah, any questions? It was all super clear.
It was indeed quite super clear. But actually, I do have one extra question for you. I've seen that you mentioned using TurboPack from Vercel.
Yeah.
So you do have some. You do spend a lot of time working with vendors like Vercel and Netlify and stuff like that. But are there any automated integrations that are currently in place?
So in terms of what I'm aware of, like integrations with third parties, the main one is Figma right now. Mm-hmm. So Figma integrates with Storybook in, I believe, 3 ways already. So we have the ability to, there's like a designs add-on for Storybook that you can like link a Figma file to a story, and then you'll have a tab inside of Storybook that shows the design for the thing that you're implementing inside Storybook. Nice for the developer. There's also the inverse for designers. There is a Storybook Connect add-on for a plugin for Figma that allows you to basically get a panel inside of Figma with the implementation, the actual story of a layer. So you click a layer in Figma and it opens up a like pop-up with the actual implementation of that component. And now we also have integration on Chromatic side, where you can like you can connect your Chromatic account to Figma as well, and then we show inside of Chromatic, we show the Figma design next to the screenshot that we've taken.
Right. And do you have any automated, like you mentioned, snapshots and that kind of stuff? Do you have any way of right now out-of-the-box tools to automate like visual regression testing and that kind of stuff? Or...
Yeah, we get this question sometimes. So basically what Chromatic does is it looks like for differences in pixels, right? And we have some algorithms to kind of eliminate the flake in that, right? Because interlacing and such is not stable. But at the end of the day, it's still a human that needs to visually review whether or not the change is appropriate. There's like ideas floating around saying, for example, oh, I have this button and it's like changed, and I approve the change of the button, then all of the places where this button is used and like changed in an identical way without having any other weird reflow should automatically be accepted. Like that's one of the tricks like we could be doing, we don't yet. Right?
Save us a lot of time.
But that would save time. And of course, like we're thinking, like, can AI help us in any way? But that's like future vision, really, because that's like the hard part about AI and things is that it's like it's guessing, right? It's like a probability of being right. And the thing is that we are offering a platform that wants to give you hard guarantees as to whether it's right. So that is a tricky thing to do, but probably eventually we'll get there too.
But, there's not going to be any storybook GPTs anytime soon.
Well, I mean, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the documentation search is already like being assisted by GPT, or that is in the works. So you're like on the documentation page of Storybook, and you can like type in the search bar and ask a question. Right, that sort of thing. But that's more like, oh, it's crawled the documentation, added it to its model, and it's like that's why it knows to answer questions, right? Which is really helpful, to be honest.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. So I've actually had the pleasure of using Storybook at a past client for their design system. We built the whole design system around using Storybook and integrated that to our front-end tools. And yeah, I have to say, you guys did a great job with it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that'll be it for you. And next up, we have one more speaker, Edgar Kloos. There you are. And if I'm not mistaken, you're going to be talking about web components. Is that it?
Yes.
All right. Well, and I'll leave you the floor.
Deze kan ik gebruiken.
Ja.
Quit. Die rode knop ligt boven.
Bye bye.
Oeh, shadow dom.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to talk about web components, and actually web components that are used throughout a large organization that have completely different technology stacks. So a little bit about myself. I'm Edgar Kloos. I actually am a UX engineer. Anybody know what a UX engineer is? Some kind of vague. So I'm a front-end developer, but I specifically focus on the implementation of design. So some people call it front of the front end, making a differentiation between back of the front end. And I'm still not sure what either of those mean, but it means more that I'm actually implementing designs primarily. And that could be inside applications. I actually work a lot on design systems. And I've actually worked on the NL design system as a developer, so that wasn't the right mix, but I'm actually working now on different design systems for companies that have stacks in different countries, but also have implementations in React, Angular, and they all want to use the same kind of design systems, and they can't really shift away from their own technology stack, because sometimes you want the company to have
React for everything or Angular for everything, so it becomes easier to reuse these Angular or components across the organization. But that's usually unfeasible and also not very desirable because you all have the same kind of lock-in with that technology. So you kind of become super dependent on that technology. And so what we've been looking at when we talk to these different clients is, well, what is it that you want? Do you want to have a separate design system for certain technologies? So you could have 3 different sets of components for a design system. You have a React version, Angular, and a Vue, for example. I've also worked in that same company. They had Sitecore, and that has a completely different build system. So you can't really go, well, you can use an NPM. No, they just panic. And so it became very clear that we need to use something that was completely agnostic to all these different frameworks. And so it became clear for clients that they can't just keep rebuilding the same thing over and over again. And if they are going to rebuild it, they should build it in a way that it becomes more interoperable. And so if you're going to pick something like web components, well, how does that compare to some of the other usages? So React is super dominant. You can see like just in the top websites that are use JavaScript, React is already at 13%. That's kind of ridiculous amount, especially when you just look at technology across the entire web. It's still like almost 3%. And it is more than Vue, more than, by the way, jQuery is not on this list. That tops everything. So I looked at the stats on this, and the main listing didn't show jQuery. It just had a separate box. So jQuery is king. It didn't say king, but it, might as well have. And so we see React basically being incredibly dominant, but also that developers are very willing to use it. And so why would we use a jQuery, not jQuery, a JavaScript component library? I was a bit of a Freudian slip there. But it is about encapsulation and about ease of use, and that you can reuse these kind of same solutions all over the place. But it turns out that web components actually does the same and actually has this built into the web as a native platform. So these are native toolings that can do, you can create your own elements. The shadow DOM is an incredibly powerful way of encapsulating natively without having to use build tools to hide it from the rest of the system. And so this, but apparently modules was also one of the early parts of the endeavor to get web components, but this has now become much more standard. And now we're also seeing JSON being added to these modules, and also CSS is also now being added. So, and HTML templates never really got off the ground as an import way, but it is a standard tag that's now well used across the HTML platform. And so, well, who's using it? So who the hell uses web components? Anybody use web components? And do you use them deliberately? This is like, oh, it's somewhere in this widget, whatever. And although by the video tag is actually using shadow DOM, and so there are a few things, but they're still native elements using the API of their web engines. But it does turn out that of all the top websites, this is a stats from Chrome status. So the Google teams are looking at what the adoption is. Turns out across all the top sites in any kind of feature in JavaScript, it's almost, that's 8.5%. So compared to all the other technology, this is being used a lot. And a lot of these technologies are like, it's 96, 97% compatible through all the browsers. So if you kind of use it, gets that kind of score. And it's really kind of bizarre how much this is actually used. And so, like I asked, do you use it deliberately? Well, it often comes in stuff, but also like third-party widgets. It's quite a useful way to just insert something very simple. But what if you wanted to use it quite deliberately in a design system? Now, there are lots of problems doing that because a design system is supposed to expose stuff, and then now you have a component system that hides stuff. And so you have to be very deliberate what the APIs are and how to toggle this kind of stuff. But the key thing about using web components is that it's interoperable out of the box. So everything, it's the problem where you want to have certain data input and output and certain behaviors that a framework has, then it becomes a bit tricky. But there are ways of doing that. So anybody who worked with web components, I don't know if anybody, this is readable for people in the back. So there are three things here. One is the template part, so template literals. So you can see this in the bottom there, using, and there's a constructed style sheet part, which is using adopted style sheets. So you can see in the top that this style sheet is actually being imported through an assert. And that way it becomes a content type of a style sheet. So the style sheet can then be just inserted through a property adopted style sheets. So this is actually loaded and cached in the browser in runtime. And you can attach it to a document, you can attach it to your shadow root. So this is quite a useful way of reusing style sheets without having to, so a convenient way of importing them in JavaScript. So what I often do is actually have these style sheets also on the main page, and then I re-import them into the Shadow DOM where I need them. So this is like a reset or a set of custom properties, so I can use those. And the other part was, let me see, is the Shadow DOM. So the Shadow DOM is where you attach the enclosed. So a Shadow DOM is basically a branch of the document mode, and so it has its own tree and an own dependency graph, which is separate from the site. But there's something to see a slot. I don't know if you can see that. A slot is actually just a window in the Shadow DOM that lets this Light DOM port through. So you can have content in the Light DOM in your document, and that Shadow DOM will then actually allow you to push that through. And so that's quite a useful way. But the code here is quite verbose. It's quite also feels archaic almost, and like, well, do I need to remember all this? Well, there are now ways. A lit is also basically a library. So it's kind of like you're moving away from the core, but the library is still trying to be close to the metal, as it were. And so they're using decorators and kind of helpers to make the code more succinct. And so this is one way of doing it. And you can see here, probably one of the key features here is actually the HTML, lit HTML feature is actually a very good way of parsing in a secure way and actually in a fast way your templates. And you can also just pass your properties through them. So when you're integrating them into a framework, so which like the component I just showed, well, if you just do that, any framework will just break. So Vue has a way of ignoring it. So there's a configuration you can use. Sort of just if it sees a web component that, well, I'm not going to compile it when I'm building the application. React doesn't really have anything, because they're actually building, and the new version is supposed to have reasonable support for web components, but Lit has actually written a wrapper to make it more connect more. So it doesn't ignore it, it doesn't declare it, it just kind of hides it with a wrapper so that React doesn't trip over it. And Angular actually has a way of declaring it, so the tooling it already has can then use it. So that they must have kind of branched off some of the functions to make sure it can do events in a certain way. I think there's ng on, which actually has a way of triggering it. And so
there are lots of ways of adding in, content or data into a web component. So attributes is one way. So an attribute on an element is usually just static, and so it's a way of setting a default. And then with that default, you can actually load a property. Each element has properties, so that's basically a normal part of the element system. And that's a good way of consuming it. So you can have your framework and say, well, you'll just add properties directly to it. So this is actually what the wrapper for React does. And but then if you want to get data out of it, then it gets a bit more complicated. So the most clean way to do it is just through events. So properties in, events out. And that seems to be with when I've worked with several teams, everybody gets that, and then that's then the standard to do that. Because trying to get teams that have all these, the company I was doing this for was Vue, Angular, and React, and they needed to have a way to do this properly. And so each team could then have an adapter or a way of parsing their data in a way that the web components could use in forms. And so this is what a configuration in Vue looks like. It just includes a pattern that says, well, let's not do that. It does a little bit more, but this is basically the trigger to help ensure that when it compiles the web component, it doesn't look into it and try and pull out properties, or because that you could get conflicts or it just wouldn't work. This is from Lit. They've written basically a helper function to wrap around an element, so you can have import a custom element, in this case my element, and then what it does is then it just, when it wraps it, it just declares it as a React element, and then acts as an adapter to pass on events and properties. So this works reasonably well, but it is a bit of a faff because you still have to write for each component. You have to make sure you have this set up. The alternative is that you basically make the component yourself. So the downside of this is that you have then two parties basically involved in managing this component, and that's actually a bit of a problem. So if you see this, the design system team should offer these adapters out of the box so you can just import them. And so that way, then there's one ownership of the problem, and you don't have it spread, because then you get resistance of teams trying to adopt these new features. Angular, something I know not a lot about, but this is what I understand, is that this is actually declaring the component and actually adds a schema so that the Angular framework knows how to deal with it. So it's not ignoring it, it's not hiding it, it's just declaring what it is, and it has additional features that it can deal with it. And there's a website, customelementseverywhere.com, and it shows a list of what the compatibility is and what the issues are. Vue used to be 100%, now it's not, because they changed the casing of, they fixed it already. But yeah, so it seems like a silly mistake just to lose that score, but yeah, but it is a problem, because if you have written your attributes in a certain way and it doesn't work, that's only Vue's fault. That's not a developer's fault. So I'm basically talking about these frameworks that run in a certain way, often with Node and Webpack or some other kind of build tool. But what if you don't have any of that and you still want to use these components? You could consider breaking the web component up into like a shadow DOM. And so you can do this now. This is kind of a recent feature that's now available in Chrome and in Safari. Firefox is working on it. It's part of the Interop 2023, so to get this up and running. And the nice thing about this is that you can just attach a shadow DOM just in the HTML. You don't need to have JavaScript do it for you. One of the advantages is then you can do this server side, and you can just inject your own transformations as the template and then just run it on the website. So it might look like something like this. So this is just a normal article. It has an H2 and a paragraph. That's the content. It's just the content of the article, but I've added a template with shadow root mode, which then automatically, it does it, Safari does it streaming, so it's not active. But when the page is parsing, when it hits the template shadow root mode, it then starts to render out the content. And then after, when it's rendered, then you can call it with JavaScript. You can actually call the element. So if it's closed, it's a bit more difficult, but if it's open, you can just directly call the shadow root. The advantage is this, then this, you can just statically parse this on a web server and then spit it out onto a page. You probably wouldn't necessarily do it like this for a CMS to have all this, actually have the code inside here. What you do with something like this is like a Blazor template. You can just add, you can have the CMS acts like a shell for the web components and say, well, these are the style sheets we need to use, and this is the content it belongs to. And then you can just have the server or the CMS render this out, and then this can be statically shown to end users. So this is one way. So you could have all the styles that I had in the normal web component. You can just have them separately published on a registry. So this is often what I do, and then have them loaded onto an asset server or CDN. And so you can run them in runtime. So you can have JavaScript frameworks where you build stuff with the framework and build time, or you can have a simple static site and load the components in through a CDN, or you can have a CMS solution where it actually just generates the HTML and then just has that served. So then it doesn't have to do all these jump through these build hoops, which you cannot, like if you want to do that on Sitecore, that would be very difficult. But the way they do with build components is actually just HTML, so that would also work. And then you can have design systems that have isolated code that will just run through different platforms. And so the usual way I do it is a design system is a collection of tools that could be custom properties to make sure that these are shared properly. It could be, it's also documentation, it's also components. It could be additional plugins. And so you can mix and match what you need within this design system to have them work across different silos. You don't need full parity throughout these teams because that's impossible, but they can adopt what they can, especially when you can publish your style sheets and custom properties, then they can utilize those in their own stack and don't have to change everything too much. So this is how I do my web components for bigger clients. And so I motored through that. I think that's roughly what I've came here to talk about. Any questions?
Yeah. Go first. Oh, thank you. Where would you suggest that you start? Is that, supposing you have teams that have completely diverged in their implementations of buttons, inputs, forms, everything across, say, AEM, Vue, React, all at the same time. Like, where do you start in trying to sort of bring it together, or?
Well, so what you have to do is actually do exactly that. So one team has this collection of components, one team has this collection of components, and then you just map them. But you have to have everybody in the room, could be remote. I've done this remote. And then you talk about, well, you built this, so what are the differences and what is the same? And as soon as you figure out what's the same, that's your starting point. And because it's web components are kind of agnostic to the platform, you can basically just introduce them piecemeal, and that accelerates. But you do need to, you can't just make one button and then, okay, you need to have a set so they can actually build something that's more than a component, that's an application. And so you kind of need a set of form elements, you need a set of layout stuff. And so once you've built that, the adoption can go pretty quick, and then they can, what you need to do then is make sure you have the version properly so they can adopt it step by step. But you need to be very aware when you're doing this, you have a very clear API of what the components do, because once you define it, you can't really change it very quickly. And so that's why you need to collaborate with everybody. So, well, what are these are supposed to do? And then we can say, well, we think it's important that it had this kind of API, these kind of properties, and these kinds of custom properties from CSS. Once that's clear, because this is another thing with CSS, it's become so complicated. You basically need the whole API set documentation of what you can put in and what you're going to get out of it. So it's no longer just a style sheet and it may or may not work. You need to really make sure that these are also just pieces of code that need to be documented clearly.
As you've worked with a lot of web components also deliberately, what do you think is the biggest shortcoming of web components?
The biggest shortcoming is that it really is quite different from when you're working with style sheets and with slots. It really is quite different. And so even when like Vue was supposed to be like web components, it's still all in global scope. And so when you're working with style sheets, you're really working in a global scope that can port through an enclosed scope. So you need to decide on where you pass things on. So this is why things like CSS layers is becoming quite powerful. So you can manage what happens in the light DOM. And then with custom properties, you can push them through, because the custom properties go past the shadow DOM boundary.
So CSS, right?
Yeah.
And do you, I mean, then you use lit a lot as well, I guess, as you showcased.
Yeah, but all my demos don't use lit. So if it doesn't work without it, then, so you need to have a clean setup. And then when people are working on it, I usually advise trying to use lit, or some people use different kind of like stencils, still quite popular. But
I was more thinking, especially if you use bare bone web components, what I experienced is like, yeah, as you said, you have very verbose templating and the missing like reactivity system. And of course, you can watch properties when they change, you can re-render, do some things, but like an actual like state management reactivity system, like other frameworks have, is a bit missing there.
yeah, and so that's actually a big gaping hole. So when you start needing it, so if you're doing it like for a CMS, this works perfectly. As soon as you need an application, you need to make a decision on how that's going to be managed. Especially if these components are going to be used in different environments, you need to decide or agree upon how that's going to work, and so that these adapters don't do weird things that are not the same, that the web components get confused over. And so lit is a good way of doing it, because it does have a reactive model that is based on native technology. So there's no weird, I think they just used eventing and stuff like that, but that's in the browser. Another one?
Yeah, last one for me. Have you experienced with frameworks actually outputting web components? I know Vue, for example, can do that. Just say, okay, let's take Vue as once it's like an external bundle, then create all the Vue components as web components and share them.
Yeah, so that's one way. So what you could do is in the build chain have the application just builds the Vue components, but then have a published version of CDN as web components. So that's, I've seen that. But Angular can do that as well. So Angular has a, Angular can actually just, with the code you're writing, it will just generate a clean web component. So that's quite nice as well. But they've really invested a lot. So they're, what's it called, Fluid, their component library. That they've put a lot of work into make that work. Because Angular is not so much really a framework. It's basically part of an IDE. And so the way you work with Angular is basically based on all the tooling around it. And so that's why they've put in a lot of effort to make that seamless.
Before you take off, actually, I do have one very last question for you. So, working with web components is not necessarily the most straightforward thing, at least not when you're beginning. So, what would be your best piece of advice for somebody who's never used web components before and wants to, dive in?
So this is another problem with web components, because it's not really a product. It's basically just a set of features inside a web platform. It's not really very well documented. So there are a few sites that have ways of approaching it. So, but a good way is just to try. So one of the ways I've done it, I've used like CodePen, and then just try and write very simple components like, but also try and figure out how to use style sheets in Shadow DOM, stuff like very simple experiments. As soon as you kind of grok that, so as soon as you understand that, you accelerate very quickly.
But don't you have any, isn't there a performance impact a little bit using web components and doing like these double imports and that kind of stuff?
Well, but because, if I go back to my earlier example, so when you're importing stuff like CSS loading and HTML loading doesn't have the same kind of performance impact as loading a script module. Yeah. And so, so here the caching is quite fast. Also, web components render really fast, but you do need to, if you're using slots, so you have code in the light DOM in your document that's being ported through a web component, then you have a flash. You have the flash of the content, and but there are ways of doing that. So there's like these little snippets of CSS. You can say if it's not defined, then hide it until it's defined, and then that works actually very well. And if you do that with containers, so I've been using the has selector in CSS, I actually get a much higher performance perceptively, because it doesn't flash, it just stays still and just renders. And it's really kind of weird. If I didn't have that, it would wait, flash, and then load. But if you can do a group of them together, they all just load at once. So it's very smooth. So even if it is slower, if you handle it the right way, the perception is very fast. And also with declarative Shadow DOM, rendering it on the server also helps as well. So you don't need to wait until it's loaded and then it starts rendering the template. The template's all basically rendered.
You showed that also now you can define the Shadow DOM inside the document itself, the HTML. Is this also like going towards server-side rendering for?
Yeah, so this is what they're going to. This is now what they're using. Lit is actually working on a SSR solution, and this is basically what they're looking at. And WebC is actually doing something similar as well.
Because there's also like one of the shortcomings I noticed, like lots of frameworks of course offer that, it's great for SEO, and it was perceived performance and performance in general, so it's good that they.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Fire team did is made this streaming, so then it's easier also to do changes on the fly. So it will stream. So when you change it, it can just stream in automatically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before close, and with that, I think we have just listened to our very last speaker. But before everybody takes off, please feel free to stick around and finish our drinks and have a chat with our lovely speakers and your fellow attendees. I very much encourage you to stick around because these guys have a lot of great stories to tell you. And yeah, have fun, guys.